It started as a normal night. I dressed up as a vampire, complete with fake fangs and blood. I met up with my friends at a local bar where they had a costume contest and a DJ. We had a blast, dancing and drinking and laughing. I even won the prize for the best costume. Around midnight, we decided to go to a nearby haunted house. It was supposed to be one of the scariest in the city, with live actors and special effects. We were all excited and curious to see what it had in store for us. We bought our tickets and entered the dark and creepy building. The first few rooms were not scary, just some cobwebs, skeletons, and fake spiders. We joked and teased each other, pretending to be scared. But as we went deeper into the house, things got more intense. We encountered zombies, clowns, witches, and ghosts. They jumped out at us from behind corners and doors, making us scream and run. Some even touched us, grabbing our arms, legs, or hair. We were terrified, but also thrilled. It was all part of the fun. But then something happened that made me realize that this was not a normal haunted house. We entered a room that looked like a torture chamber, with chains and hooks and knives. There was a man lying on a table, covered in blood and wounds. He looked like he was in agony, moaning and writhing. A masked figure stood over him, holding a saw. We thought it was another actor, another scene. But then the masked figure turned on the saw and started to cut the man's leg. The man screamed in pain, a real scream, not a fake one. Blood spurted out of his wound, splashing on the floor and on us. We were horrified, frozen in shock. This was not a show, this was real. We tried to run, but the door was locked. The masked figure saw us and laughed, a maniacal laugh. He said, "Welcome to the real haunted house, where your worst nightmares come true. You are my next victim, and you will never get out alive." He dropped the saw and grabbed a knife. He ran towards us, waving the knife in the air. We panicked, looking for a way to escape. We saw a window on the other side of the room, but it was too high to reach. We needed something to stand on, something to break the glass. We looked around and saw a pile of bones in the corner. They looked like human bones, maybe from previous victims. We grabbed some of them and threw them at the window, hoping to shatter it. Some of them bounced off, but some of them cracked the glass. We threw more and more until the window broke. We climbed on the table and jumped out of the window, landing on the ground outside. We ran as fast as we could, away from the haunted house, away from the masked figure, away from the horror. We didn't stop until we reached the street where we saw a police car. We flagged down the officer and told him what happened. He looked at us with disbelief, but then he saw the blood on our clothes and the bones in our hands. He called for backup and went to investigate the haunted house. We waited in the car, shaking and crying. We later found out that the haunted house was run by a serial killer who had been kidnapping and torturing people for years. He had rigged the house with cameras and speakers so he could watch and hear our reactions. He had also hacked the ticket system so he could choose his victims. He had chosen us. We were lucky to escape, but we were traumatized by the experience. We had nightmares and flashbacks for months. We had to go to therapy and take medication. We never celebrated Halloween again. It was no longer our favorite time of the year. It was our worst. I was 21 years old, attending a Halloween party at my former best friend David's house. David had died of a heroin overdose 2 years prior in 2022. Still, before his death, he would throw big Halloween parties every year at his house, as his parents routinely flew to Chicago every October 31st to attend their friend's party. Even though David was gone, the parties continued on like clockwork. It was almost as if he was still there, orchestrating everything from beyond the grave. His parents kept the house exactly as he had left it, like a museum frozen in time. Same furniture, same decorations, even the Bowie and Ramones posters still hung in his bedroom. I felt an uneasy chill as I walked up the steps to the front door. The last time I had been here was the night they found David's body. He had accidentally overdosed alone in his bedroom after his parents left for their annual trip. A few days after getting the news, I came by to pay my respects, only to find the house wholly deserted, almost as if his family had vanished along with him. The front door creaked open, revealing pulsating music and costumed partygoers. David's mum, Mary, greeted me with a strained smile. "Welcome, so glad you could make it," she said warmly, but her eyes seemed vacant. Walking through the crowded house, I felt David's presence everywhere. It was as if his spirit was weaving between people, watching them drink his dad's whiskey and laugh loudly in his living room. I found myself wandering down the hall toward David's bedroom. The sounds of the party faded away as I approached the closed door. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and stepped inside. Everything was the same. His unmade bed, his desk littered with books and CDs, his acoustic guitar leaning in the corner. But there was one difference. David was there, sitting on the edge of his bed. His wiry frame and shoulder-length hair were backlit by the moonlight streaming in from the window. "Hey man, glad you came," he said in his familiar raspy voice. My chest tightened. "David, but you're died." Then he chuckled softly. "Yes, I know, but I had to see you one last time." I stood paralyzed as David rose from the bed and approached me. There was a profound sadness in his eyes. He told me he was so sorry he left me, and he was in a bad place. But he wants me to understand that none of it was his fault. Tears streamed down my face, telling him, "I missed him so much," and he managed to choke out. He smiled sadly, putting his hand on my shoulder. Suddenly his expression shifted to terror. He told me I needed to get out of that place. Then the bedroom door slammed shut behind me. I whipped around and began pounding on it frantically. I screamed and pleaded with David to let me out, and I could hear the distant thud of party music playing again through the door. As I desperately twisted the doorknob, I felt David's ghostly hands wrap around my throat from behind. He whispered that I needed to stay with him now. The cold hands tightened their grip as I struggled to breathe. The room started spinning, fading to black. Suddenly I woke up, gasping for air. I was in my bed, covered in sweat, and I realized that it was just a nightmare. I thank God it's just a nightmare. I checked my phone with relief, and I made a mental note. I would not attend any Halloween parties this year, especially not at my dead best friend's house. Some places are better left in the past. It was Halloween night, and I was walking home alone from a friend's party. The full moon cast on the empty streets as dried leaves blew across my path. I pulled my coat tighter against the autumn chill and quickened my pace. I hated walking home alone on Halloween. The holiday always puts me on edge with its obsession with all things creepy and macabre. As I hurried down the sidewalk, I scolded myself for not leaving the party sooner. I found myself alone after midnight in a sleepy neighborhood that had transformed into a ghost town. The slightest sound made me cringe. A flapping curtain in the wind, a snapping twig, the skittering of unseen animals in the bushes. Turning a corner onto my street, I sighed, relieved knowing I was close to home. Just a few more houses and I would be safely inside, away from the unsettling atmosphere of this night. That's when I noticed movement up ahead. A dark figure stood under the street lamp in front of my neighbor's house. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out who was there. The shadowy form seemed to turn towards me, and that's when I realized with horror that it had no face, just a pale blankness where its features should have been. I stood paralyzed for a moment, my heart racing. The faceless figure started drifting towards me, its movements erratic and jerky like a marionette doll. I whirled around to run back the way I'd come, but to my shock it was behind me, blocking my escape, and I was surrounded. Panicked, I ran up the steps of the nearest house and pounded on the door, screaming for help. The faceless things kept approaching, their unnatural movements growing faster now. The door finally opened. An elderly man stared at me in confusion. I forced my way past him, slamming the door shut and locking it. The old man yelled at me to get out of his house, but I ignored him. I peered out the window only to see the faceless ghouls had followed me up the steps. They reached the door and began pounding, desperately trying to get inside. Their pale hands smacked against the glass inches from my face, the old man's screams drowned out by the terrifying tapping. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying I would wake up from this nightmare. A crash jolted me upright. The creatures had broken down the door. They poured into the foyer, swarming around the elderly man who cried out and tried in vain to escape. I ran toward the back of the house, looking for an exit, the horde close on my heels. Barreling through the back door, I found myself in an alley. I sprinted toward the streetlights at the end, gasping for breath. The sound of clicking footsteps echoed behind me. Just a little farther, I'd be on the main road where I could find help. I dared a glance back. A sea of pale, blurred faces raced down the alley toward me, their unnatural movements rapidly gaining ground. Terror seized me. I wasn't going to make it. Then everything went black. The last thing I felt was their cold hands grabbing at my ankles.